The Global Peace Innovation Summit, held in Geneva, was packed. Heads of state, tech leaders, and diplomats from over 80 nations filled the glittering hall. Cameras were everywhere, live broadcasts, social media streams, news crews. The world was watching. Donald Trump walked on stage to loud applause from his American entourage. He grinned, waved, and then leaned into the mic with his usual bravado. "You know," he began, scanning the room, "some leaders know how to build, others only know how to beg." The crowd shifted in their seats. He turned his head slowly. "And I'm talking about Captain Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso. Shame on you, Ibrahim." Gasps rippled across the hall like thunder. People weren't sure they heard it right. Trump smiled smugly. His team clapped. A few African leaders looked away in disbelief, but Traoré sat still, his hands folded, eyes fixed, calm, no expression, no anger, no fear. The cameras zoomed in on his face, not a twitch. You could feel the weight in the air, the tension. The insult didn't just hit Traoré. It hit every African watching. But no one expected what was coming next. There was complete silence. A silence so sharp, you could hear someone set down a glass of water 3 rows back. Traoré stood slowly. He didn't rush. He adjusted his uniform, buttoned the top of his jacket, and calmly walked to the podium. Cameras followed every step. His boots echoed on the stage floor. Trump leaned back, smirking. Traoré paused. Then, with a quiet voice, clear, steady, he began. "Mr. Trump, you build towers, but not trust. You build walls, not bridges." The room stopped breathing. He looked around the hall. "In my country, we don't build on gold. We build on blood, on sacrifice, on silence in the face of humiliation." A woman in the crowd wiped her eye. "You say shame on me, but you forget. I don't lead for applause. I lead for the unborn children of my land, who still drink from rivers instead of taps." Someone in the back stood up. Trump blinked. "I didn't come here to trade insults," Traoré continued. "I came here so my people are no longer whispered about in rooms like this." Now, the silence wasn't empty. It was sacred. And then, he said a sentence no one would ever forget. Traoré gripped the podium. His voice dropped to a whisper, but it hit like thunder. "You don't speak to me, Mr. Trump. You speak through me to every African child who was told they were nothing." Mouths dropped open. Journalists stopped typing. "You mock me," Traoré said softly, "but I carry my people's pain in my spine, not on my sleeve." He took one step forward. "That shame you threw, I returned it to the ground. Because where I come from, we plant even what was meant to kill us, and we rise." A sob echoed from somewhere in the room. Trump's grin faded. The cameras cut to him. His eyes darted nervously, his lips pressed tight. Traoré looked him dead in the eye. "My people don't need pity. They need justice." Then he stepped back from the mic. He didn't wait for applause. He simply turned, walked back to his seat, and sat. The audience sat frozen, like statues, staring after him. Then a single person clapped, then another. Then the room exploded in applause, slow, heavy, emotional. Trump didn't clap. He stared at the floor. The insult was returned, not in anger, but in truth. And truth hit harder. As Traoré returned to his seat, a strange silence swept the room. Then, slowly, applause began to build. But not everyone clapped. On the right side of the hall, a man in a gray suit whispered harshly, "Who does he think he is?" Another snorted, "He's still a soldier in a poor country." But the cameras were no longer on them. They were locked on a young African student in the back row, tears rolling down her face. She stood, trembling, and clapped with both hands above her head. Then others followed. Not just Africans, but Germans, Brazilians, a few American journalists. Meanwhile, Trump sat stiffly, jaw tight. His face had changed, the confidence gone. One of his aides leaned in and whispered, "We need to get ahead of this, he's trending." "What do you mean?" Trump snapped. She showed him her phone. Traoré was flooding every major platform. A 30-second clip of Ibrahim's sentence had already been reposted over 700,000 times. Outside, protesters had gathered, some angry, others hopeful. Inside, Traoré sat quietly. He pulled out a small leather notebook. On the last page, in bold black ink, was one sentence: "Never match their volume, match their meaning." It was a lesson he had learned the hard way. Years before Geneva, long before the cameras, before the medals, there was a boy, 9 years old, dust on his feet, shirt torn at the shoulder, carrying a yellow plastic jug. Ibrahim. He had walked 2 kilometers barefoot to fetch water from a muddy river for his sick grandmother. The water smelled of rust and frogs, but it was all they had. One day, he saw something in the river, a boy no older than him, lying face down, gone. His jug bobbed beside him. That night, Traoré didn't sleep. He stared at the stars, wondering, why are we forgotten? That question burned into his soul. It followed him through school, through sandstorms, through hunger. It followed him as he joined the army at 18, not to fight for war, but to protect the dignity of those the world called less. Now, decades later, that memory returned as he sat in the summit. Because when Trump said, "Shame on you, Ibrahim," he hadn't insulted a man. He had insulted the boy at the river. And deep inside, Ibrahim promised himself, "The world will remember that boy. I will make them remember." He looked up. The next speaker was already at the mic, but no one was listening. The next delegate, an oil executive from Europe, spoke in polished, rehearsed sentences about economic growth and strategic partnerships. But no one clapped. People were still whispering about Traoré. Cameras panned to him again, and he wasn't even speaking. He just sat there, focused, like a man who knew storms but refused to flinch. At that moment, a producer backstage called the live broadcast control team. "Shift the feed. Keep the camera on him. He is the story now." In the VIP lounge above the summit floor, a U.S. senator muttered, "That soldier just flipped the entire script." Even Trump knew it. He leaned toward his mic again, but his voice cracked. "Well, maybe I was a little too harsh earlier." People looked at him, but not the way they used to. He adjusted his tie and sat back down. Meanwhile, across the world, in Burkina Faso, a group of schoolchildren watched the summit from a small classroom with a single old TV. Their teacher whispered, "He's one of us. That's our captain." One of the girls smiled through tears. "He talks like my father." At that moment, Ibrahim Traoré was no longer just a leader. He had become a mirror, reflecting every voice that had been silenced. Behind the velvet curtains of the summit stage, U.S. officials scrambled. "He can't go viral," one of Trump's aides said, voice low but tense. "Too late," another replied, tapping her screen. "The BBC just published the full clip, captioned, 'Africa just spoke back.'" Inside the main hall, journalists weren't taking notes anymore. They were live streaming reactions. Young Africans in the press gallery wiped their eyes. One whispered into her mic, "Ibrahim didn't raise his voice, but he raised our dignity." Meanwhile, Trump sat awkwardly, flipping through his prepared speech. Words like global leadership and democracy now rang hollow. Ibrahim stayed silent. He hadn't come to fight for attention. But the truth? His silence was louder than every microphone in that room. Backstage, a technician asked a question no one could answer. "Why does it feel like the world just shifted?" In that moment, cameras caught Traoré quietly folding a note in his jacket pocket. Just 4 words written on it. Words no one had seen yet. Words that would soon be heard by over 2 billion people. Far from Geneva, in a village near Gawa, Burkina Faso, an old woman sat on a wooden bench under a mango tree. Her eyes were glued to a neighbor's television, powered by a shared solar battery. Her hands trembled slightly, but not from age. She was watching her son. "Ibrahim," she whispered. Her neighbors stood with her. Some cried, others gasped, but she just watched. When Trump said, "Shame on you, Ibrahim," she flinched. Not out of fear, but memory. Because when Ibrahim was 10, she remembered how he returned home bruised after being mocked in school for wearing a torn uniform. She held him tight and said, "One day, they'll regret laughing." And now, they weren't laughing. From a dusty courtyard, she watched the most powerful man in the world freeze before her child's calm. When Traoré delivered his sentence, her neighbor dropped her water jar in shock. Another fell to her knees. And the old mother? She closed her eyes. "He didn't raise his voice," she whispered, "because his pain is louder than sound." Back in Geneva, Ibrahim reached into his jacket again. He pulled out the folded note and slowly began to walk back to the microphone. The room quieted again as Ibrahim walked calmly toward the microphone. No security guard moved, no translator breathed. Even the live stream chat froze. He unfolded the note in his hand. He didn't speak immediately. Then, with his usual quiet voice, he said, "This note was written by a child in Burkina Faso. A letter slipped to me during a school visit." He held it up. She wrote, "Captain, if they laugh at you, don't cry, because they laughed at us first." A sharp inhale ran through the crowd. "I kept this note in my jacket every day since then," he continued. "Not because I needed courage, but because she needed to know someone would speak for her." Trump stared at the floor. "I don't carry shame," Traoré said firmly. "I carry voices." His eyes swept the room. "America builds walls to silence the world. We build words to wake it up." Thunderous silence, a new kind of silence. Then, a man in the far left row stood and clapped, a delegate from Norway. Then came the rest of the room. But this time, it wasn't applause. It was something closer to confession. And outside the hall, something massive was about to happen. As the standing ovation faded, a phone rang in a quiet government office in Ouagadougou. It was a journalist calling from London, asking, "Can you confirm Captain Traoré just addressed the U.S. president without raising his voice?" And the whole room applauded. The secretary, holding back tears, smiled and replied, "You can't teach dignity. He was born with it." Across the capital, horns honked. Women ululated in the streets. Taxi drivers rolled down their windows yelling, "He spoke for us." A little girl named Aisha ran barefoot across a dusty yard, shouting, "Mama, he used the letter, my letter." Her mother paused, confused. Aisha pointed to the television. "That was my handwriting." Back at the summit, Traoré didn't look moved by the standing ovation. He sat with his hands folded, staring ahead. Trump, on the other hand, was sweating. He whispered to an aide, "We need to issue a statement. Something diplomatic." But the aide shook her head slowly. "It's already too late." The world saw the truth. In silence. Outside, a massive digital billboard across Times Square lit up. It read, "He didn't clap back, he stood still, and the world stood with him." 10 days before the summit, Captain Ibrahim Traoré had visited a school on the edge of Bobo Dioulasso. No cameras, no reporters. Just him, a plastic chair, and rows of children in green uniforms. Aisha sat in the third row. She had no shoes. Her dress had a small tear under the sleeve, but her eyes were fierce. After Traoré finished speaking about dignity and hope, she quietly passed him a folded piece of paper. No words, just a stare that said, "Read this." That letter had just one sentence. "Captain, if they laugh at you, don't cry, because they laughed at us first." He didn't say a word. He simply put it in his pocket and walked away. Now, at the summit, H's letter had been read aloud to the most powerful nations on Earth. She sat beside her mother, staring at the screen. "Is he in trouble?" she asked. Her mother shook her head slowly, eyes full of tears. "No, child. He just shook the sky with your words." That night, the village held no parties, just candles, just silence, and tears. Because for the first time, they weren't being defended with guns. They were being defended with truth. Trump's shoulders dropped. For the first time in the entire summit, his confidence cracked. The audience didn't boo. They didn't cheer. They just watched him, quietly. And nothing is louder than being watched in silence. He reached for the mic. His hands shook slightly. "Let's move on to the next session," he mumbled. But even the moderator paused, unsure. Ibrahim Traoré hadn't said anything cruel. He didn't raise his tone. He didn't even defend himself. But in doing nothing, he said everything. The balance of power had shifted, not through force, not through insult, but through presence. Later that night, behind closed doors, Trump was overheard asking his team, "Why did that hit me so hard?" No one answered, because they all felt it too. Meanwhile, Traoré was already boarding a plane back to Burkina Faso. No press conference, no tweets, no need. The summit was still going, but the story had ended. At least, that's what people thought. But the next morning, something happened that no one saw coming. An American veteran posted a video, eyes red, voice trembling. He said, "I didn't know who Captain Traoré was, but now I can't stop thinking about him." In the days that followed the summit, the echoes of Traoré's quiet yet powerful reply spread like wildfire. In a small cafe in Brussels, an elderly man paused mid-sip of coffee. His eyes welled up as he recalled his own childhood humiliation at the hands of arrogance. Across a bustling market in Lagos, a young mother whispered the words of the note to her daughter, as if they were a gentle lullaby, reminding her of the quiet strength that lies in dignity. Social media buzzed with heartfelt tributes. A news anchor in New York tried to find the correct term to describe what had happened. A reverence for truth over bluster. A call for justice wrapped in soft tones. Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso, community gatherings lit up with stories of resilience and pride. In living rooms and on dusty village roads, people shared memories of when they had silently endured insults, and now felt empowered by Traoré's stance. The summit had unwittingly united voices across continents. Every shared post, every tear shed on a screen, was a ripple in a vast ocean of awakening, dismantling old power dynamics, one gentle yet unyielding word at a time. The following week, international media erupted with discussions that transcended politics and borders. In London's quiet libraries and Tokyo's bustling streets alike, citizens debated how a single moment of restraint could speak volumes. News programs replayed the summit scene with slow-motion shots of Traoré's calm gaze juxtaposed against Trump's fading bravado. In heartfelt interviews on local radio shows, individuals confessed, "I felt seen, and he gave voice to my silence." Documentaries began to form overnight, exploring not only the power shift at the summit, but also the intertwined human stories behind each reaction. A small online forum saw an outpouring of messages. Veterans, teachers, and even business leaders recounted times when they were mocked by figures of authority. Teachers used the incident to encourage children to stand firm in the face of injustice. An influential blogger remarked, "Today we learned that courage isn't about raising your voice, but about speaking truth in a whisper when it matters most." With each conversation, the world was reminded that real change blossoms from empathy, respect, and the humble bravery of those who choose dignity over defiance. In a quiet suburb of Paris, a former soldier sat by a window, gazing at the autumn rain. He recalled a time when his voice was lost amid the chaos of war, until he witnessed a moment that restored his hope. That moment came from a faraway summit, where Captain Traoré's calm defiance transcended language and power. His heart swelled with an indescribable mixture of relief and quiet pride. In local community centers across Europe, people began commemorating that day, not with loud protests, but with silent vigils of hope and remembrance. A little boy in a Parisian school, inspired by his teacher's recount of the summit, painted a mural of a gentle leader with outstretched hands, as though shielding the downtrodden from stormy winds. Traoré's gesture was more than a reply. It was a beacon of unseen courage that united millions. From the grief of past injustices, a resilient spirit blossomed, echoing in every tear, every whispered prayer, and every determined smile. In that moment, the world learned a vital lesson. True strength is measured not by loud declarations, but by the quiet, unwavering resolve to stand up for what is right. 2 weeks after the summit, something strange happened. A letter arrived at the White House. It wasn't sent by a government or diplomat. It came from a little girl in Burkina Faso, Aisha. It read, "Dear Mr. Trump, you told our captain shame. But our captain gives us bread, books, and dreams. If you were in our village, we would offer you water. Not because you were kind, but because that's who we are." The staff read it in silence. They placed it on the president's desk. He didn't say a word. He stared at it for a long time. Later that evening, he walked past the press and didn't answer a single question. That night, a rare tweet was posted. "Sometimes silence speaks louder than speeches. I've heard you. Dignity matters." It wasn't enough to undo the moment, but it showed the world that even the powerful can feel. Traoré never replied to the tweet. He didn't have to, because when the people speak truth, history listens. A month after the summit, an unexpected global event unfolded. In cities around the world, Lagos, Paris, Johannesburg, Accra, Toronto, Nairobi, even New York, people lit candles in silent gatherings. No protests, no slogans, just stillness. They called it the Night of Dignity. Children stood next to elders. Teachers hugged students. Mothers held babies close. They remembered not just Traoré's words, but his silence. A silence that reminded them of how much they had endured, how many times they were mocked, underestimated, or ignored, and how powerful it felt to finally be seen. In a refugee camp in Niger, an old man held up a piece of cardboard. It read, "We are not poor. We are poured out." Across from him, a teenager whispered, "Ibrahim reminded us that even the forgotten can be unforgettable." Some cried quietly, some prayed, some just held hands. And far away, in Burkina Faso, Traoré watched from his office window. No guards, no press, just the flicker of candles on his street. And for the first time in years, a tear slid down his face. But it wasn't pain. It was peace. A few months after the summit, Ibrahim Traoré was invited to deliver the closing speech at a different gathering, one focused on education and rebuilding trust between nations. He walked on stage, no flash, no fanfare. He stood before world leaders and young people from 60 countries, and he said only one thing. If dignity had a voice, it would whisper, and if justice had a face, it would look like yours. Then he stepped back and walked away. No applause at first, just tears. People weren't clapping, they were crying, because for the first time in a long time, they weren't just being spoken to, they were being felt. Back home, Aisha hung her old note in her classroom. Her classmates gathered around it like it was gold. A new mural appeared across Africa, painted by children. A soldier standing, not shouting, just listening. And beneath it, he spoke for all of us. If this story made you feel something, drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from and what line hit you the most. Like this video if Traoré's words touched your heart. And don't forget to subscribe, because more true, powerful stories are coming. And your voice belongs here. Together let's build a community where dignity speaks louder than noise.